Ok, tu peux lancer l'enregistrement. So, hello everyone, welcome to the seminary of the DIMARVEC. So today we are receiving Carola FLORES, invited, and I'll let you introduce Carola. I'm sorry.
All right. So, Carola is a researcher in coastal archaeology, and I had the pleasure to meet her in Chile when I was doing my PhD. And it's very interesting because she developed an interdisciplinary approach. She graduated in the University of California. It's her master thesis and her PhD in coastal archaeology, and she's developing different fields approach like archaeoecology, paleoceanography, and more recently she has worked on shelf hook, which is very important. It's one of the most important items in the coastal population, the ancient coastal populations living in Chile. So she has worked in several parts of the Pacific, and today our research will develop several aspects of what she has done in the Pacific coast, the Eastern Pacific. So thank you, Carola. It's a great pleasure to meet you today.
Merci beaucoup, Adrien. Bonjour, merci à tous. Mon français est très rudimentaire, so je vous parler en anglais. Well, we are gonna move on a voyage to the South Pacific, to the desert coast of Chile. First of all, we're gonna be talking about marine resources along the prehistory from the archaeological record in Chile. And I want to highlight that marine resources are several things in humans' life. They are food, they are raw materials for making tools, for making personal decoration. They have also been used as social status or in context of social status, and also as a social currency, as money, specifically for shells. So here we have a few examples of those different ways that marine resources can play a role in humans' life. So then the relevance of marine resources. First, if we look at human migration towards the America, we can see that the movement along the ocean has been very important, with several archaeological sites marking that fact. So then through exploration, through adaptation, through settlement, through the use of resources, and also through the development of technology to adapt to these habitats, people have been relating and knowing and growing in this relationship with marine resources. When we look at, and more specifically at the Pacific coast and the Southern Pacific, where we are in Chile, it's the same thing. Here we have early archaeological sites along the coast, with the archaeological record that demonstrate that people were living and using these marine resources. And there is one theory called Kelp Highway, first presented by John Erlandson, an archaeologist from California, telling that the distribution, the productivity, and the reliability of kelp habitats allowed for fast movements and for a fast way to know the habitats, because it was the similar habitats from the north to the south of the Pacific. So then people know these habitats, and because it was very predictable, people were able to move along the coast or by foot or by boat. Yeah. And here there are a few archaeological sites from California where the archaeological remains, which means all the fauna remains and also some marine flora remains, are from the kelp forest. And we dates very early for American prehistory. And also very south in Chile, we have another site called Monteverde that also has shown this evidence of people knowing very well the marine environment and all their resources. So then here we have Monteverde with evidence of kelp as food and also as medicine, because some of the species that were found are edible, but some others are not. Some were found on the edge of lithic artifacts. So then there are all these species present in these sites that is 4,500 years before present, with a very diversified use of these kelps that, by the way, were very far away from the coast, because at that time the coastline was far away. The ice sheet was bigger, so then the ocean level was lower. So then the site was even very far from the coast, and they were using these resources very heavily. Yeah. So then this evidence tells us how all these are, or has been our relationship with marine resources and marine habitats all along the Pacific coast. And one specific archaeological site that I have been working through my whole life as an archaeologist are shell middens, which show are the proof of this very strong relationship with marine habitats. And these shell midden archaeological sites are all around the globe, like all around the globe. I just put a few, but they're wherever you go, probably also here to the Mediterranean, you might find these shell middens, which are accumulation of mollusk shells with artifacts, ecofacts, features that can be remains of stoves, but also in some locations they are also where they were burying their people. And with ecofacts, I mean all the natural artifacts, all the natural things, fauna and flora that people were using and moving to the site. Yeah, that's why they are eco, but they are as artifacts, which are the cultural tools and things that people were making. So then these shell midden archaeological sites are very interesting because they are evidence of people activity. So, I mean, you find a shell midden, and that's the evidence that were humans living there, that were reoccupating very productive places. They were using coastal and marine resources. And they also show, or through the study, you can learn about the human-environment interaction. And also, they're very interesting because they are anthropogenic soils that have a lot of elements that can be used as paleoenvironmental proxies. Analysis, isotopic analysis on bones and shells that can tell you the temperature and other things on the ocean. They are a stratigraphic marker of human presence. They have been used in this discussion on the Anthropocene. I don't know if you have heard about the Anthropocene. And so then the shell middens have been part of the discussion as the biomarker of how people have been modifying the topography, for example, and the pH of the soils. So these shell midden sites are the sites that I have been studying. All the data that I'm going to be showing you are coming from this type of sites. So we go back to the northern part of Chile, the coast of the Atacama Desert. Here are kind of like the views of the places. Here, I'm going to be talking mainly about sites located on Taltal and Iquique, which are on the 21 and 25 degrees latitude south. And the archaeological sites looks a little bit like this. This is a small sampling from a bigger area of an archaeological site. And these are samples that we get bones, charcoal, stones, shells, and also we get some algae. So we have these shell middens, which are the evidence of these human activities. And I'm going to show you a few examples from fish bones, kelp remains, and shellfish. So here first we have a compilation of all the species, the shellfish species we have found from several archaeological sites in the area of Taltal. This is the list of the species we found in this. There are like around 10 or 15 sites. Here, we group this data in periods. In 6 different periods. One goes from 11,500 years before present to 10,000, then 8,500 to 7,500, and so on. Yeah, so then we can group and see the abundance of these specific species through time. And here we organize them by habitat, the intertidal species, the intertidal subtidal species, and the subtypes. So then what we can see are differences in the abundance, darker are more abundant, lighter less abundant, on the species. Some species are very predominant through all these 1,000 years. And also we have some moments in time where there is a higher focus on gathering subtidal species, for example, and some other, So then we see variability in what species and in what amount they were gathering through time for these several thousand years. And also we have these archaeological sites with different cultural contexts. So then at the beginning, the early sites from the early Holocene, they have a coastal economy, more like a very broad subsistence economy. And then around the middle Holocene, we can see through the technology and through the type of sites that they were having a more specialized maritime life. Yeah, so then we also have changes in the shells that they were gathering, the species that they were deciding to collect, also the way they were living. And also we have some environmental variability that I'm gonna show you in a little bit. So then we have this long sequence of how people were gathering shellfish through time in this specific place in Taltal. And we wanted to compare with modern data on landings to see what things could have been changed because the environmental context is different, because the political context, I mean, the policy is different. So then what we have here is the same, well, the time frame is smaller, but modern data during for the last 16 years, all the species group by functional groups. This is a paper that is in review with my co-authors here in the room. So then we wanted to know how things were changing through time. And also because we have what people were doing, but also there are these environmental contexts that of course are strongly related to what you find, right? So then in order to grasp the climatic variability, we use sea surface temperature data across the Holocene, because the SST ecological studies have shown that it's very robust and on defining generally how the ecosystems are. So then here we have, this is a timeline from 12,000 years before present to the present. This is present data. And here we have degrees Celsius. And this is isotopic data on shells, on the carbonate of the shells, which can be used to see changes in temperature of the ocean where they were. So then here we see changes through time. And we also use satellite data for this amount of years to see changes in present time of the sea surface temperature. So then with these two sources, we can see changes in time with moments cooler periods and warmer periods. And with that, we group and got the mean temperature for these 6 periods in prehistory, and also the mean for each year in modern time. And then we compare, functional groups and SST for the past at the same place and for the present. The numbers in colors are related to this SST, and each period and each year grouped. We see how they were grouped, how the functional groups were grouped around these moments. So what we see, which is very interesting, a high stability in the assemblages that they were catching through thousands of years, different people in the same place, with the assemblages dominated by kelp forest species, and mainly of high meat contribution. Yeah. Then we also find that despite this stability of certain species, we see changes in functional composition if we see cooler moments and warmer moments. And therefore, the SST seems to be important for human decision. SST as a proxy for how the ecosystem was in terms of abundance, growth rate, and things like that. We also see, because these changes, we see a very clear and interesting adapting capacity to these different and changing environments from 12,000 years up to the present. And something also very important for me as an archaeologist who works on shell minerals and on archaeological remains of marine resources is that archaeological data is a good proxy for past marine conditions, and how people were behaving in terms of what they were finding, and what was available. So now I move to another resource, which is kelp. And what we have from the side of Chile, we're still working on this data. We have archaeological remains of kelp. We get coal husk, charcoal, pieces of kelp charcoal, sticks, bladers, front, everything. And you can see in a very good conservation, they have very good conservation. And the sites that are there they have dates between 10,000 and 3,000 years. And we have kelp remains through the whole time. And we will do similar things, like trying to see how they were changing through time and how they compare with the modern harvesting practices that happens few meters from where the archaeological site is. And what we have done in another place in Altal, which the conservation is not so good, so then we don't find the complete pieces of kelp. What we find are black floors. It is an excavation, the profile of an excavation. Black floors made of charred kelp inside these domestic structures. So then they were burning this kelp to make this cement, these floors. So then we don't get the whole kelp, but what we get are the shells that live in the kelp. So then we use them as a proxy for presence, but also for the size, based on ecological studies which show that there is a relationship between the size of the small lymphocyte snails and the kelp where they're living. So then we were measuring the shells that we were having with a regression, and then we could see through time the sizes of the kelp that people were harvesting, where they were, these are archaeological sites, how much, and through time. In this area we have evidence, the oldest evidence is from 6,600. But how you can see, we can, through the study of these remains of marine resources, we can study the amount, the characteristics, and also, this is more archaeological thing, but the context where they are. If they are in houses like floors, if they are around stoves, if they are around, for example, if they are offerings for burials, we find those too. So then, what is the meaning of these resources? So then we have seen shellfish, mollusks, we have seen kelp, and then what about fish? We have the same type of graph, key through time, all the sites grouped by time periods, all the species that we find there, darker, the more abundant, lighter, less abundant of each species, and here they are grouped by habitat, nearshore reef and inshore offshore pelagic fish. And what we see through time in this area, again, the middle Holocene is an important moment when people shift from a coastal subsistence economy to a more specialized maritime ecology, and we see this in the fish data. And what we have also some moments where nearshore were also more important than other moments, which are related to the human dynamics, but also to the environmental characteristics. And here are some of these nearshore species that are the more predominant in these assemblages. And here the inshore, offshore pelagic species that are present. So then what drives this pattern? Again, it's always a mix between environmental conditions through time and how warmer and cooler waters are changing through time, and also oceanographic currents, but also how people were developing these different techniques to be able to get them, like through hooks, through harpoons, or through navigation devices. So it's hard sometimes when I know if it's environment or it's culture, and it's always both, and it's always kind of difficult to identify how they play. But we work on that all the time. So because the technology is very important, we are now moved to the technology and how marine resources were used as tools, as raw materials for tools, and how important they were, even as important or more important than the food, because with this you get the food that you want. Yeah. So here, it's also very interesting how along the Pacific coast, this type of archaeological tool is present at different times. Here we have archaeological sites very early with this evidence, so then that sites that are 11,000 years before present with hooks made of abalone shells or oysters. Then we have also in Mexico, California, Mexico, very old dates for these hooks that were made of mussel shells. Then we have a later time, during the late Holocene around, with dates around 2,500, also with shellfish hooks made on abalone. And then we have Chile and Peru with dates for the appearance of these sites around 8,000 years, always using a single species, which is the Choromytilus chorus, which is a big mussel shell. So then people were using these marine resources in different ways to make similar things and at different times. What happens in Chile? We have this called shellfish hook culture, because all along the northern coast there is the presence of these archaeological sites, which are only made on mussel shells. So then there were all along like 1,000-something kilometers of coast where people were gathering and selecting a single species to make this very important artifact to fish. So also there is not just a functional, it's not just a functional objective, but also there is something with how this shell function, but also how this shell may be good, provide good fortune for fishing. Who knows? That's a more difficult thing to know in through archaeological evidence. So then here is an example of all the assemblages of hooks that we find, complete preforms, fragmented hooks probably that were broken while they were being manufactured, or they were broken while they were being used. But it's a big assemblage, very interesting artifact that I have been studying the last time. Here is a modern example of how from the shell you get all the way with preforms to the hook. We have been working with people trying to recreate how people were making in the past these artifacts. And here is all the data we have from the site. So then we have this technological tradition focused on one single mussel species through around almost 4,000 years, doing the same thing with the same resource, which is coincidence with this change that I was telling you from this coastal to more maritime and specialized subsistence. And finally, also, how do we explore the use of marine resources, but through time, but in terms of social meaning? And what we have is all along the northern coast of Chile, we have several rock art with marine hunting and fishing scenes. This is one example, the most famous one, which is called El Médano, that has been dated between 7,800 to 3,000 years before present. So then in here we have this specific species that I want you to remember, because that's what I'm going to be talking about right now. So then there are ethnographic examples showing that the success in marine hunting is a means for individuals to signal competitive capabilities. The examples that we have are from turtle hunting in Australia, from whale hunters in Indonesia, and also the swordfish hunting in Taltal, the area that I have been talking to you about. And this idea is coming from a theory called costly signaling theory. So present in the present time, around Taltal area, there is this hunting for swordfish. Albacora is the name in the common name in Chile. And it's considered a tradition that reflects the expertise of people in the sea. Modern hunters consider themselves as the descendant of these changos, the changos who were making this rock art. They identify themselves, the swordfish hunters, as changos because they keep doing the same practice. They do it with harpoon, and it requires speed, precision, physical endurance, and knowledge. And Here there is an ethnography from the area, and there are a few phrases that the colleagues have been getting from this study. And one is, it's dangerous. Its fish is not killed at once. It can hit you with its worm, break the boat, and take you away. So it's very dangerous. People wait on the coast for these hunters with the prey, with high expectation. And when the fish is killed with a single harpoon shot, hunter skills is consolidated and social prestige and recognition increases within the swordfish hunters in comparison with the other fishing, with the others. So this is the ethnographic context for this hunting. And again, if we go back to the fish data that we have during the middle Holocene, we have the appearance of these specific and more offshore and more dangerous fish species. We have a lot of evidence of harpoons in the sites, in Saltale in the sites, and we have the rock art specifically depicting this species and in a successful situation. So then, based on these relationships, we propose that swordfish hunting is a prestige, or might have been a prestige signaling activity during the Middle Holocene within these communities in Taltal, in the specific area that I have been working, but also along the Atacama Desert, because there are other places where they are still also doing the hunting, and in the archaeological sites, we find this swordfish and another species. So, well, what about then about the marine resources using prehistory along the coast of Chile? It's important always to think broad and think that I like this quote from these colleagues, which say economic activities are not just about making a living, but about communicating values and expressing meanings, not just in prehistory, but also in the present. Here I have a nice picture of a fish king with a piece of fish wrapped that was found several kilometers inland, and there is a long, a big and important circulation of marine resources between the coast and the desert. Here there is an example of this rock art, not all right on the coast, but also in a place where people move north, east, west, to get lithic raw materials to make tools. So the marine resources are not just marine resources, but are material culture that have values, that have context, that have times. So the fish, and for the archaeological data in Chile, fish and shell circulation away from the shore has been shown that creates social differentiation between the coastal people and the inland people that have access to these coastal resources. So within this small travel through the few things that I have done, studying marine resources and trying to understand how people have been collecting them and also changing to time, patterns to time. I think it's very interesting how coastal, archaeological sites in general can be linked, in this case, coastal archaeology can be linked with marine research. Being archaeology as a long-term, being the archaeological sites as a place for long-term observations on how people have been interacting. The time resolution is a little bit coarse, but it's fine. It works. So the few questions that I want to share with you about this link between archaeology or coastal archaeology and marine biology. First, like, what research questions you have about coastal communities, or I have, everyone on coastal communities of the past. Where are the archaeological sites near your modern archaeological sites or the areas where you are working? What are the assemblages that these sites have in terms of abundance, diversity, size, diet of the fish, for example, that could change through time also. The antiquity of these deposits, how long have been people living there, and also the paleobiological and paleoclimatic processes that you can get from these archaeological sites. So what we see from the archaeological record in Chile, first are thousands of years of interaction and local knowledge buildings on coastal ecosystems, which is the case for Chile, but it's the case for everywhere you go on coastal, on ocean shores, but also that happens for lakes and other water areas that I don't work on those areas, but it also works for that. So then what we see, general patterns are, there is, most of the time there are great stability through time on what people were doing, what species they were targeting. Therefore, there are some changes in the emphasis on certain species and the technology developed to get those. And also important to highlight the relevance of coastal resources in several aspects of humans' life, not just in prehistory, but also in present time. Well, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And do not hesitate if you have questions here or questions online.
Comments?
I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but are all your field studies only on the ground or also on the water?
Yeah, good question. No, I work on the coast, on the ground. Okay. But there are several, all the early sites, like from up to 8,000 years before present, most of them are underwater. But because here the currents are very strong, to work underwater is hard and more expensive. So we can try to understand what was going on underwater from what we have on land.
Do you use species ecology found in the archaeological artifact, etc., to reconstruct paleoclimates or paleotemperature and different stuff like that?
Yes, I have used the shells to get the paleotemperature, which is one of the graphs that I show you. So then what we do is we collect stratigraphically, we collect shells that we directly date, and also analyze oxygen isotopic. So then we can get time and temperature through time. And yeah.
Then when you identify the species, and you link it to like ecological characteristics like temperature range, depth range, stuff like that, to rebuild, for example, the depth where it was collected or stuff like that.
Yeah, well, the chronology studies I have not done because it's so much slow. It's a high time consuming. But on the Chilean coast, there are a few work that I have done on fish vertebrates and shells to reconstruct not just the temperature, but how the temperature was directly affecting the assemblage that was present. And also we can do food webs and yeah, because as we have seen, the assemblages from the archaeological sites are a proxy for file environment conditions so that we can use species list, abundance, predominance to time.
There is a question online from Seth.
Yes. Yeah, hi, Carola. The great presentation. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what my question is about, you've sort of emphasized sort of the uniformity of the use of marine resources in the Americas, that there's this sort of the idea of this highway, the Kelp Highway coming from north to south, and that you would find these communities all over the place making very heavy use of coastal resources. But when I moved to Chile, I really was struck how different it was than what I had seen elsewhere, just by the intensity of the use of marine resources. That you'd find people everywhere collecting things from the rocky intertidal. And that wasn't my experience either in California or in Chile or in Mexico, in other places in Latin America. And so I'm wondering, is that just my biased impression because in California, most of the indigenous communities were exterminated? Or is there really something special about Chile in terms of intensity? Have you compared what you're seeing in Chile with what you see in other sites in Latin America?
Well, Claro, when I say stability, Claro, is looking at sometimes, or most of the time, on the most abundant species. But sometimes when you look at the not so abundant species, you can see changes. for example, with sandy species, they change through time pero in terms of intensity, in Chile, the intensity of harvesting and fishing near shore is very heavy, you're right. But it's not indigenous people, it's everywhere. People that, for example, has lost their jobs, they go and gather and sell kelp or fish or shellfish, or even during summer. I mean, they camp on the shore for 3 weeks and they eat from the shore. So then you're right that the intensity is very heavy in Chile. I don't know if at the end who has worked on that on the modern situation could add something.
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic because in Chile there was lots of migration along the coast, and then administratively they prohibited to migrate among regions. So lots of changes happened from that. And on some region there was overexploitation because they couldn't move away to follow the resource dynamics. So it's a very complex topic, but in Chile it's still like a long-term tradition. As Carola said, it's not just like the Changos descendientes, but all the people in Chile are very linked to the sea. And I was also surprised when I was in Chile to discover that.
See, and the comparison between modern and archaeological assemblage, we did it in one single place, but also it varies a little bit if I go and look at Iquique, for example, which we have not done it, or if we go to southern places, we will see differences, but what we have done for the comparison studies has been in one place in Taltal, which so far that's what we find, a very stable way to use the resources to more than 12,000 years.
Can I ask another question? Could I ask a second question?
Yeah, sure, please.
So the other thing that so you mentioned Monteverde, which is, I believe, still a pretty controversial site because it's so much before what you're seeing in other places. Now, all of your results start at 11,500 before the present. Could you have gone back further in time, or was that just as far as your data goes and there isn't evidence of human activity before that? You know, what explains that gap between Monteverde, which is 14,000 years before present, and your results, which start in 11,000?
Yeah, this linked to what you were asking, because all the oldest sites that are not underwater are around 12,000, 11,000 years before present. And the ones that are older are very hard to find. So then Monteverde is one particular example. There is another one in the more inland in the desert, but to find these older sites is harder. So then around 11,000, we have several sites along the coast, which are the oldest that are on land that we can excavate more easily.
Because the older sites would be underwater nowadays. Is that the idea?
Most of them.
Yeah.
Yes, so I'm a geneticist working on shellfish, and I was wondering if you or some groups are working on DNA that could be extracted from those shells, old shells, in having in mind some question about the connectivity of past human populations along the coast. Do you work on that with those kind of tools?
You know, I don't work on DNA, and the problem is the conservation.
Yes, I know.
There are some places like the one in Iquique where all these algae are, where we have some pieces of the mollusks, but not the meat, because the meat was eaten. So then we have very few remains to do DNA on tissue.
Yeah, but shells are enough. Yeah, we can extract DNA. Yeah, so maybe we can exchange on that, because I would like to work with some people here in France where they have all this amount of shells everywhere. And I think the same kind of question could be applied on all the sites you showed us. I think it could be very interesting. The idea is if they could be used, the information with one species, the most abundant, I would say, could give some information about the way people moved or not those those animals?
Well, there's nothing done along the coast, so if we can use the shells, it will be very interesting, and I have a lot of questions that I'd like to tell. Great, thank you. There is also some person there. Please.
Yes, thank you very much, Carola, for the presentation. It was very interesting. I have a question about the use of shells inland. How far can you find these shells inland? And a second short question was concerning the use of shells perhaps as a currency, like you see cowrie, for instance, in the West Pacific. Could you observe such kind of use in the East Pacific? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, shells can go all the way to the Atlantic. And because Chile is so narrow and we have the Andes, they go very easily and fast to the Andes. But we have there is literature showing that some Pacific shells have been found on the Atlantic shore and the way around. So then they move very far. And I know few papers in Africa that also shows how far inland, because Africa is a much bigger continent, how far inland they can go, because the shells preserve very well. So then that's good for that. What was the other question?
It's about the currency, a possible use for monetary exchange or trade. Is it traded?
See, well, in Chile, we have not done any research on that, but based on the research done in California and in other places, I'm sure that in Chile or in South America, we have similar contexts. One specific example is the shell of Spondylus, which during the Inca Empire, which was the last empire before the Spaniard came, the Spondylus shells and also the Spondylus fragments and artifacts made on Spondylus were moving together with the Inca Empire. And they have some symbolic and ritual meanings, but also there are some papers that show that they were used as a currency. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question on a similar topic, because you saw briefly a Brazilian shell mill, and it was enormous, very big. So what are the main differences you can already assess from I know it's very recent, but from your work from this year, you see some uses of the sea resources that are kind of different to the resources in Chile?
Well, the sambaquis, which are the shell middens in Brazil, they are the most important shell middens in South America, I will say. They're big, they're like the size of this building, and they have been built as domestic areas, but also as ritual places where they were burying their people. And they are so big that they are also part of a topographic new landscape that they were built. So that's the main difference, because in Chile we have big shell middens, but not that big, and they have not been built in a way to create a different landscape. So that's the first difference. And also the tropical environment and assemblages that they have on the Atlantic, we don't have it. And there is a clear some studies that have been done in these sambaquis shell middens on the Atlantic show changes between a more warm and tropical and mangrove assemblage to a more cold and Mediterranean. And we don't see, so far in the shell middens that we have in Chile, we don't see those clear patterns on changes on the shore that we can see on the Atlantic.
There is a question in set, I'm seeing.
Is there another question over there?
Yes, thanks for the presentation. Maybe I missed the information in your presentation, but I was just wondering, when you present the list of the different species and the shift between habitats along the time, I was just wondering whether you or a colleague looked at the nutritive value of the species that they target, or my question is that only related to climate and the habitat, or do they actively target some species because they know they are more energetic for them, or something like that?
Yeah, for sure there were when I said in one of the slides that the main species that were targeted are from the kelp forest, but also are the ones that have bigger meat, the bigger species with more meat. And some of them are more easy to gather than others, and they are both present. And we have not done any meat calorie study to compare and to see that through time instead of just abundance and species so far. But it's a topic that is very important, and it has been done very well in California.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you to you.
I had a question. Thank you for the presentation. On the fact that along the American coast you have similar hooks, but from different species, I was wondering if there are tools to try to figure out whether it was convergence and people had the same idea, or how much people were connected and came with the tool from California to another place and say, okay, look at this, we can do the same. Is there studies on that, and having the dispersal of people plus the culture and plus the...
Well, in California, it's very interesting because the oldest appearance of the hooks are in California, Mexico, 11,000 years before present. And then there is none until in California, the US, there is nothing until 2,000 years before present. And the California people in the US, they have excavated a lot. So then there is this gap of several thousand years that they were not talking. Maybe there was a border. I don't know. I don't know what was there, but there are several thousand years that there is nothing going on. So I don't know, and they have not done the study yet. But that's very interesting because it's not that they have not done the work or they have not excavated. And in Chile, what we see at the beginning, it was like, okay, it started at 8,000 and it ended at 4,000, but with few sites here and there. And now with the chronological data that we have seen that in at least 4 different areas, we have early dates for these hooks and very late. So then we kind of see different development at different places. But these people were moving back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So then they knew what they were doing. And they are very different in the shapes and in the way they were making. So yeah, chronology, looking at how old, we see different nucleus of development, but when you see the two, they're almost the same. And when you think I mean, you make a table in the same way because someone told you to do it in that way. So then that also tells you that they were connected culturally and they were sharing their knowledge of how to do things. In Chile, at least. In California, I don't know.
Very much.
Do you find a link between the food material and species composition that you find in the shell midden? Like, is it switching as the composition of the assemblage change?
When they start making the hooks, or change?
Like, they change because they can't find the species that they used before.
To make the hooks?
Yes, to make the hooks.
Well, in Chile, in most of the places along the Pacific that have data or published on hooks, the archaeological sites have high amounts of that species. For example, abalone, shell middens are full of abalone. But along the Chilean coast, most of the sites is the same, like a lot of mussel shells in places where they were making hooks made of mussel, except for one area, Taltal, where mussels in the shell middens are very rare and only appear when I find remains of hooks. So then this is something that I have not done yet. I have some isotopic data, but what I think is like they were getting the mussels from other places, moving back and forth as I was telling. So then the only example where we don't see this species, the species that they were using for the hooks, is in this area of Taltal. In all the other places, what they were just gathering and selecting probably the strongest or the brightest or the easiest.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the questions and for the time. It has been a pleasure.
Well, thank you all. Thank you people online and people in set. And thank you again, Carola, for the nice presentation.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Bye-bye.